All right, people, we're back. Victory and Vices podcast. We're in full effect. Me, Rory Spooner, Rhys Henley. No James Veck. He will be back with us next week. Apologies again for you that wanted to actually tune in and see James Veck, scheduling conflicts. But as you can see, very special guest below us, Miss Helen Ward. Helen, thank you for taking the time to join us. Very much appreciated. This makes it all that little bit more special for us, being that obviously you are a Welsh footballing legend, so to speak. Now your name is in the history book. So thank you for coming on. It's very much appreciated. Something we were really looking forward to. I suppose an excellent place to start is, with everything that's going on. I know it's been a tricky time for a lot of athletes, especially in the women's game. How are you keeping, sort of from a physical standpoint and a mental one as well, more importantly?
Yeah, it's been a rough 12 months, hasn't it, for everyone, really. I think we're pretty much in fact, it might be today that is the year anniversary of when we first went into lockdown, or very, very close to it.
Yeah,
so it's not been easy, no. And this time last year it was kind of like, we're going to be locked down for a couple of weeks, and that turned into a couple of months, and here we are, still in very much the same situation. So yeah, it's been tricky for me as an athlete. Like you said, it's not been easy to keep focus, keep motivation, keep fit. But I think, touch wood, I've managed to do that okay. I think this winter lockdown has been a bit tougher in that respect, because everything's a bit harder when the sun's not shining, isn't it? And when it's rainy and cold outside, it's always that bit more difficult to get yourself out and to keep yourself nice and fit. But hopefully we're coming towards the end of it. As I said, it's been a long time, but we're here and we're getting through, and hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel, and things can gradually start going back to normal when it's safe to do so.
Yeah, no, definitely. Have you had sort of instructions as to when, not normality will be back, but as to when you can start being reintegrated into the playing scene? What would give you any sort of idea as to when that may be?
Yeah, so I mean, I spent the last sort of 5 or 6 weeks, maybe longer. I sort of went on a loan, or dual signing with London Bees. Both Watford and London Bees have been really great in allowing that to happen, because obviously for me, I've had to consider my international career, and the idea of not training or playing from the middle of December right through to the end of the March was crazy, and it wouldn't have been beneficial to me, and my place in the Wales setup could well have been in jeopardy because of that. So I was fortunate that I have got a local team in London Bees that is still playing and training in the Championship. So I've gone across there, and then recently we've just had confirmation that we can go back to training with Watford on the 30th of this month, which is a Tuesday night. So I'll be back with the girls then, ready for an FA Cup game on the 4th of April, just 5 days later. So it's going to be an interesting week trying to get ourselves ready for an FA Cup tie. But yeah, it'd just be nice to be back with the girls and back with the squad. And it's been a long time coming, and I'm sure all the other girls are desperate to get back as well.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I bet they'll be buzzing to see each other. That's interesting you mentioned London Bees then. So I would have thought that Watford, obviously being Watford, would have had priority over London Bees. Was there a particular reason they were allowed to sort of keep training and playing and Watford weren't?
It's just because of the leagues we're in at the moment. So you've got the WSL and Championship, which are considered by the government as elite. And then in Tier 3, which is the National League, which is where Watford are at the moment, that was considered as non-elite or grassroots or something like that, which has caused a lot of controversy because, not just myself, but there's other players in that division that have or are current internationals. So to be told that you're only a grassroots player was a bit of a kick in the teeth, to be honest, and something that is, not nice to hear when I've spent my whole life trying to be as elite as possible. To then not be allowed to play. But yeah, it's just the way it's been, the way it's gone. But yeah, as I said, we should be back together at the end of the month, and hopefully things will be looking a bit brighter from now on.
Yeah, I think it is interesting what you're saying there about, it is disappointing sometimes to see where the female game is in the UK, especially when you compare it perhaps to the state of the women's game perhaps in the United States, where you'd say it's immensely popular. I just wondered really, I mean, why are they so far ahead in your opinion in the United States? in terms of the standing in the game, the popularity, the revenue? What do we need to do in the UK to close that gap?
I think historically, football, or soccer as they call it over there, was never the number one sport in America. You look at basketball, baseball, that kind of stuff, American football, of course, and they've always been the big sports in terms of male participation, whereas here in the UK it's always been football, and it's always been about men's football. So I think the women's team then doing so well on the football side of things, or the soccer side of things in America, they built up their own sport in a way, and they become the best in the world at it, and that created attention, it created interest, it created enthusiasm around the sport, and it didn't get compared to the men's game. Whereas over here we're still obsessed with comparing men's football and women's football. Yes, they're the same game or the same sport, but it's a different. There's so many differences. I don't know why people can't just put them side by side and enjoy them both. It's a bit like the Messi and Ronaldo.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah,
you have to choose one, but I don't see why. Why can you not just enjoy how brilliant both of them are? And it's the same with women's football and men's football, and women and men's sport in general. There's this obsession with comparing the two, and I think until we get over that, there's always going to be that problem. People are going to feel like they have to take sides and they have to only like one, and it's impossible to like the two. Whereas in America, it just seems to be a different mentality. And of course, like I mentioned, the success that the women's national team have, they're world champions time and time again. They regularly draw in big sponsors, big crowds, big everything, big interest. And that's obviously helped them in how it's received over there. And just think over here in Europe and in the UK, we're just a little bit behind in that, and it's just a little flip of a mindset. So if we can get into the younger generations and teach them that it's okay to enjoy women's football and men's football, then hopefully that will start to shift, and we'll see a big change in that sense.
Yeah. And with regards to the profitability and things in the States, I think it's a big business over there. I think you see a lot of the female footballers over there are quite outspoken. I think there's one or two ones that everyone's familiar with. But I think to what extent then do you agree that that the women's footballers should be paid the same as the male footballers? To what extent do you think that's achievable in the UK?
Again, I mean, it's a difficult one, because you can't argue with the fact that women's football right now in this country, it doesn't bring in those revenues. So you cannot justify the sort of wages that the guys are on. The men's Premier League and even the Championship, to an extent, they pay crazy wages, but because the TV deals and the coverage they get, the sponsorships, the endorsements, it all, I'm not going to say justifies it, because some of the wages are ridiculous, but they can afford it, they can do that, whereas we're not at that place at the moment. I think you just can't compare the two, and it's not about equality in that sense. I'm not saying that we don't deserve to be paid more, because I think there needs to be some sort of middle ground. I think it's just the interest and the respect of the sport needs to grow. Once that happens, and if you start bringing in the revenue and the commercial deals, then that's when you can start having that conversation about whether you should be getting paid the same amount or not. But until that happens, it's a question that everyone keeps throwing at us as you want equal pay. We don't. We just want the respect and the acknowledgement that what we're doing, about what we're doing. In contrast to that, though, however, in America, where the national team wants equal pay, that's a totally different argument, because actually they do bring in the revenue, they do bring in the crowds, they do bring in the prize money. And I think I read somewhere last year that the American women's jersey was the most sold jersey on Nike.com for the whole year, the women's specific one. So there is an argument there that actually, hey, we are bringing in just as much, if not more money. We are bringing in a lot more interest. So they're kind of justified in their arguments, and then it kind of gets thrown around at every female footballer. Oh, you will want equal pay. It's not the case. It's different scenarios call for different things. So yeah, they've certainly got a case, but I think the rest of us, we've got a little bit of catching up to do and a bit more growth to do before we can have those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely deserve the popularity. I mean, it's absolutely been helped as well with the fact that the male football team has sort of declined in their in their popularity and form over the last decade, and it's allowed the spotlight to very much be on the women's game, and they've shown that they're fantastic. I suppose we had a chat about this on the podcast a few months ago, just with the debate of equal pay and things like that. And like you rightfully said, if a person in your position playing for the clubs that you've been playing for was to pick up the same wage as, you know, what was Wayne Rooney on back in the day, maybe £500,000 a week, that would gut the clubs in the Women's Football League. I suppose my take on the situation would probably be that women should be entitled to the equal slice of the pie that male footballers get, because, like I said, the revenue that male football clubs make is so much more, and their wages are so much more. But there's no reason in my mind why the slice of the pie shouldn't be the same.
Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're saying. The sort of percentages rather than the absolute numbers. Yeah, no, fully agree. But I'm not a business person, so I'm not sure how all the figures and numbers work. So it's probably that I best leave that to the hierarchy at clubs to make those decisions.
Yeah. Do you know, the whole experience as a woman in football is very interesting, because, you know, I get to see in the headlines, and, you know, it says equal pay, and there's always a lack of context. It's almost like the media use that now just for clicks, and then it enrages people. They're like, what? Equal pay? This can't be right. And everyone kicks off about it, but there's never any context. So to actually speak to someone like yourself and get that bit of context is very interesting. And it leads me nicely into something that I sort of, maybe I'm a little bit ignorant on, because I don't know an awful lot about women's football. But for example, in terms of exposure in the game, I know a man's career path in the game. For example, you know, you're spotted at a young age, you go into an academy, you're with the under-18s, you're with the under-23s, the reserves. If you're really good, you'll skip most of those steps, go straight to the first team. As a young female in sport, for example, what happens when you reach the age of 16? So obviously you play as a youth. Do you then get picked up professionally, or is it on a semi-pro contract? What happens specifically?
I mean, it's very different from player to player. I'm 34 now, so my career looks very different from when I was 16 to what it will for a 16-year-old now. So when I was growing up, there was no talk of professional football. It was never even in my thinking. I was still paying to play until I was 21. My first contract wasn't until I signed for Arsenal on New Year's Day in 2009. And even that was just a sort of pay as you play. If you're in a match day squad, you get paid. If you're not, you don't. And then in the summer, when there's no games, you don't get paid. So it's very, very different. For me, my path was, I joined a youth team when I was 8 or 9, played for them at Watford until, as I said, I was 21, might have even been 22. And that was just the way it was. I just went from the youth teams up into the senior team at the same club, and then joined Arsenal and carried on from there. Whereas nowadays you've got the youth academies, you've got the sort of centre of excellence. They're not called that anymore, but it's something along those lines. Regional talent centres, they're called, which are usually attached to. Hold on, Charlie. Sorry, my son's just
Charlie, get in,
joining
in as well.
Enjoying the conversation. And yeah, you can get picked up by scouts whilst you're playing for your youth teams, in the reserves, in the under-23s, that kind of thing. And it's probably a similar sort of path now to what it would be if you're a male footballer. The only difference I'd say is that you've probably got more chance of being picked up a bit later on. You know, if you're a male and you get to the age of sort of 22, 23 and you haven't been picked up, you're probably assuming in many cases, I know there's the odd person that will still get picked up. Don't do that, please. That will still get picked up later on. You look at Jamie Vardy, someone like that. But generally speaking, you're going to assume that you may not make it. Whereas in women's football, there's a bit more scope to still have a chance a little bit later on in your life to be picked up by one of the bigger teams.
Yeah. Do you know, I read earlier on, and I found it so fascinating, you've never had a professional contract, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
That blew my mind. Me and Reese were talking about it before we came on. And for you, someone that just, you know, the back of the net like the back of your hand, you know, you score goals in your sleep. And I'm sat there reading this, and I'm thinking, how is that? How? Like, just how? I just don't understand.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you know. it's just the way my career's fallen, really.
Yeah.
And I've still enjoyed plenty of seasons in the top league. As you know, I've played plenty of international games, and I've treated my career, or I've looked after myself, you know, in as professional way as I can, without actually being classed as a professional. And when I was at Reading and we got promoted in 2015, some of the squad turned professional after that. But for one reason or another, the club and the management decided that they thought it would work best that I only had a part-time contract still, even though I was almost full-time in terms of how often I trained with the team. I think it's because I had my daughter at that point and they thought it wouldn't be possible for me to do it. But, you know, that's probably a discussion for another day, in terms of whose decision that maybe should have been. But yeah, it's just one of those things, and it's just the way my career's gone. But as I said, I've got no regrets, and you know, maybe I would have loved to have been a professional at some point, but right now, if I look back on my career, if it ended tomorrow, I'd be pretty happy with how it's gone, and I certainly wouldn't have too many regrets.
Absolutely. I mean, you're Wales's record goal scorer. You know, something to be incredibly proud of. It's interesting you should say that, actually, about what happened with your daughter. I did want to ask. I mean, I've got to be careful how I phrase things, I suppose. But I just wanted to know, really, sort of, what is it like to be pregnant and a footballer? I mean, obviously, you see where in the men's game, for example, you know, you hear of footballers having a child and still making it to the game the same day. Obviously, that wouldn't be possible for a woman. I'm wondering.
That'd be quite messy.
A bit. But I'm wondering, sort of, at what point in the pregnancy do things need to become a factor? You know, what point do you need to stop playing? What point do you go into the game? How does it affect you physically?
Yeah, so I stopped, I think, with both Emily and Charlie around between sort of 12 and 14 weeks along. So looking at just around about 3 months into your pregnancy, where you start to get a bit bigger and things become a little bit more, I don't want to say dangerous, because it's perfectly safe to keep training and things to a point. It's the contact and, you know, the risk of potentially falling over or that kind of stuff that you have to be wary of. So obviously, once you get to that point where that becomes an issue, you need to think about it and take a step back from the physical parts of football in terms of the contact and that kind of stuff. But, you know, I trained in the gym and I trained on my own right up until probably 4 to 6 weeks before I had Charlie. It was a bit early with Emily because she was my first, and there's not much research out there about training and you know, sport during pregnancy. So I was a little bit more cautious, but I did more homework the second time around and was able to keep going for a little bit longer with Charlie, which then hopefully put me back in a better place after I'd had him. But yeah, and again, after pregnancy, there's lots of things that you have to consider, that your ligaments are much more lax because of the hormones in your body. That puts you at risk of potential, you know, knee joint, you know, that kind of ligament-based injuries, I suppose. But at the same time, there are benefits because you start producing more red blood cells when you're pregnant, and you kind of keep that for about a year afterwards, which obviously helps with aerobic fitness. So it's a time when the last thing you want to do is sort of cardio and aerobic training, but actually you can maximize your body, and it's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to it. And if you can get over the sort of the tiredness and the mental side of it, your body's actually very capable of doing some amazing things in the year after pregnancy.
Yeah, that's true. I read about Serena Williams winning the Australian Open, being pregnant, and it just emphasized to me how much women really are superheroes. Like it's actually quite incredible when you think about it, that Serena would be pregnant and win the Australian Open. And, you know, it's just that whole aspect of sort of not just football, but sport in general. It kind of, we never really think about it. We just almost not even take it for granted. It just never comes up in conversation. We always seem to think to ourselves that, yeah, you know, women's football, yeah, okay, equal pay, but we never look at the other aspects of it. So you provided us with a lot of background there that I think a lot of people will find very interesting. And it's a good takeaway from this as well, just how much you have to go through as a women's footballer. I was curious to know as well, because me and Reese obviously played football growing up, and I know I like to think I was okay. Reese wasn't as good as me. But, you know, at what age did you realize, well, I'm actually really good at this? because I've always wanted to know what's it like to be the best player on a pitch, because I don't think I ever was growing up.
Well, I don't know that I've ever necessarily been the best player on the pitch, but yeah, I don't know. Someone asked me something similar the other day. At what point did I think I've made it, or that this could be something more serious than just a hobby? I think as a youngster, I was very fortunate that our team at Watford was very good in our league, which was obviously only a local league at that point. But I got used to winning trophies very quickly and at a very young age. And I think that when you win things, you obviously you realise that you're part of a very good team. Not necessarily as an individual did I ever think that I was better than anyone else or anything like that, but I just knew that I was part of a great team with lots of great players who went on to have very good careers themselves. And obviously as a striker, the responsibility of scoring goals came to me. So I was often the top goal scorer. Doesn't necessarily mean, and of course doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the best player, but you do tend to take a lot of the glory. So that was always nice. And anyone that says any different will lie. You do always want to score the most goals. It's what we're there to do. So I guess everything just kind of came together as a kid, and by doing that and by winning things so often, that's obviously going to give you confidence when you move up into senior football. And again, when I started out for the seniors with Watford, we were an okay side and we just grew together. We had a fairly young team. A lot of us came up from the under-16s into the seniors, and we kind of grew together. And I think we've spent a season in that league, and then the next season we won it. Then again, we went up. We spent a couple of seasons there before we won it. So we were never too far away from winning competitions at Watford. And then when we made it into the National League, when I think I was 19 or 20, and we were playing against the big guns, the Arsenals, the Chelseas, and all the big sides, you kind of think, yeah, this is the real deal now, and I'm still doing okay. I'm still scoring goals, and you kind of think, yeah, all right, I'm not so bad at this after all. But it kind of all just came along without me sort of worrying too much about it, because I suppose I don't know how to word it, but the game hadn't grown to the point where you were reading about it or seeing scores every week. I wasn't really paying much attention to the clubs in any leagues that I wasn't in, or any international sort of football. And it's never a case of, I need to get to that level. I need to play against these. I need to sign for this team. I kind of just grew with the game. And I think that maybe took a bit of pressure off, because I was able to just enjoy it. Yeah. And then once it became a bigger thing, I was old enough to maybe deal with it a bit better than maybe I would have done at the age of 16 if that was the case back then. So yeah, I don't know if I've really answered your question there in terms of when did I think I was any good, because I'm not sure I've ever got there, but I kind of just fell into good teams, and I was able to keep scoring. So it just kind of happened, really.
Yeah, that's a humble answer. If I was top at anything, I believe I'd have walked in with a crown, some I'd have, believe me, everyone would know I was top. You treated it great with some humility. It was very impressive. But no, big yourself up. You've done great. I mean, I wanted to ask in terms of obviously your stature, because like I said, it is in terms of the women's game, that is a legendary stature. It's not something that you can just ignore. Do your kids know who Mummy is in terms of you being a footballer? Because I imagine you playing football against the kids in the garden, like they're probably thinking we can take her here, and you end up winning 110-0. So, are they aware?
Well, my garden's on a slope, so if I'm going downhill, they've got no chance. No, they know I play football, but I don't think they know much more around that. I mean, Emily's only 6 and Charlie's only 3, so for them, football is just Mummy. There's not really much else around it, other than what they see on the TV. They don't really understand maybe what international football is, or they've certainly got no idea of the division I play in compared to the WSL and that kind of thing. So I think I'm just Mummy and I play football, and I'm more than happy with that. I don't, if they get older and they want to have a look back at my career, then hopefully they'll be proud and they'll realise, that it's not been too bad.
Yeah.
But at the moment, it's just, this is Mummy, she plays football, and that's it. Get on with our day.
You've got, trust me, those teenage years, you've got some serious cool points that you could use. Feel free to use them when they come along.
And what's your mentality as well? Like when you're playing with them in the garden, you can go two ways, I suppose. You can let them win, or you can go sort of full Azerbaijan on them and absolutely
full Azerbaijan. I like that.
What's your mentality?
Well, my daughter's not massively into playing football, I have to say. Her coordination is lacking somewhat, which is a bit disappointing. Charlie's a little bit more interested in it. He's got a tendency to pick it up as well, which is maybe comes from his dad, because his dad used to be he was a goalkeeper, so yeah, he could go, you know, he could either be this goal scorer or the goalkeeper. There's not really any in between in our house. But yeah, if they want to play football when they're older, then great. But for me, when I'm playing football with the kids, it's just to muck around, and I try and tame my competitive side, and not to keep putting. I do try and get a nutmeg in, because that's quite hard on the kids. With a full-size football, it's difficult to get it through, so that's quite an achievement if I ever do that. But no, I try to rein it in a little bit when I'm playing with them.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer a little hardship goes a long way. So if you need to nutmeg them to build a bit of character, look, exactly. There's no harm in that at all. But going back to Wales, obviously, because like I said, what you've done is not normal. It is legendary. The sort of highlight for you, or maybe best goal, was there a particular moment where you look back and you think, wow, that is the peak?
There's a couple that stand out. I think my first goal against Luxembourg on my debut will obviously always be really special, because I think, again, as a forward, you're judged on scoring goals. So to have scored one on my first start on my first game for Wales was kind of a weight lifted immediately off your shoulders, because as any other forward will know, the longer you go without a goal, whether it's a stretch of games or from the start of signing for a new team or making your debut for someone, the longer you go without one, the more pressure it becomes to start scoring. So to score, you know, I think it was within 10 or 15 minutes of my debut was massive for me. Yeah. So that one certainly stands out. There was one on my 50th cap as well. I think we played at the Cardiff City Stadium, and it was the first time we'd played there. And we were playing Belarus at home. It was 0-0, about the 80-something minute, and I managed to pick the ball up midway into their half, beat a couple of players, and then stuck one in the top corner with my left foot, which is unusual in itself. And that won the game. So that was nice, because I think it was my 30th goal on my 50th appearance. So it was quite a nice rounded one. And then more recently, scoring against the Faroe Islands during the last campaign was massive for me, because it had been a long time since I'd scored my last goal, and it was the first time I'd scored since having Charlie. And bearing in mind he turned 3 in September, and it's the longest I'd ever gone without scoring a goal by quite some margin for Wales. So it was nice relief, because I openly admit there were times I questioned if I'd ever score for Wales again. You know, and as nice as my record is, I wouldn't have been satisfied if I'd have gone that long at the end of my career without scoring another goal. So to knock that one in against the Faroes was nice. And it took a bit of pressure off us as well, because we've been playing a little while without scoring, and we were starting to get frustrated. So that was another big moment for me. But there's been so many that we could be here all day talking about them.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
And obviously you said that you want to keep scoring for Wales. I mean, I read I was doing some research, and I read that you were looking to retire soon, but that's been sort of pushed to the curb a little bit by the fact that you're wanting to play at a major tournament. I read that the Women's World Cup format has been extended to allow for more countries to participate. Is that right? And is that going to help Wales get in?
Yeah, I think the format has changed to allow. I think it's more European teams potentially. I'm not sure exactly how it works. I haven't looked into it too much, because we've been just focusing obviously on our Euros campaign. But yeah, in my head before the pandemic and everything that's happened in the last year, I think my goal was to hopefully qualify for the Euros, and then retire this summer, as it would have been, you know, at a major tournament, and then be able to leave the game happy at 35, having achieved everything that I felt I needed to achieve in football. Obviously then coronavirus came around, and then we didn't manage to qualify. And I think it was in January when Boris made his announcement about another lockdown and that my league wouldn't carry on. I had real questions as to whether I could go and do another sort of 3 months of training on my own, especially this time around when there are other teams playing and training. I felt I might get a bit left behind my Wales teammates in terms of fitness, whereas in the summer we were all in the same boat and all going through the same thing. This time felt a bit different, and I just got a bit sort of overwhelmed by the thought of having 2 kids at home trying to train, it being winter, you know, and all that kind of stuff that comes with lockdown, I suppose. And it did go through my mind to retire, and I put just sort of a tweet out there saying basically that it was becoming very difficult, and the response I had was unbelievable. I got so many positive replies and so many people reaching out to say that, you know, hang on in there, don't retire just yet, you'll only regret it. And I'm so glad those people did reach out, because it made me think, do you know what, I'm not ready to give it up yet. I'm not ready to jack it in. And if I retire now and I let something like this sort of define the end of my career, I'd be really disappointed, and I know I'd regret it. So I sort of gave myself a little talking to and thought, no, come on, you retire on your terms, not on the terms of a virus that's, you know, had so many, it's caused so many issues around the world. I wasn't going to let it cause another one for me. So yeah, it was something that did cross my mind, but it didn't last too long, thankfully, and I've managed to get myself back into the right headspace, and hopefully I've got another couple of years in me.
Yeah, that's that killer instinct. I can see that in you. That's why you know where the net is. You're like, no, I'm not giving up, and I like that. That's good. No, that's really good. So with that being said, obviously at some point it will all come to an end, and hopefully that chapter sort of, you know, it closes on your terms. The idea then, is it sort of a journalism sort of approach, or is it maybe even something like a YouTube approach or coaching? Do you know what you'd like to maybe do?
But there's a few options. I've obviously done my degree in sports writing and broadcasting, and I've had a bit of experience over the last few years with that, whether it's been a bit of TV work or radio stuff, and I really enjoy doing that. I'm also really interested in the sort of behind the scenes stuff at clubs, where the content production and, you know, making some cool stuff, because, you know, as a football fan, I really like seeing that and getting a bit of an insight. You know, obviously not something quite as big as the Spurs and the Man City All for Nothing documentary, but I do like that idea of getting more, you know, into the lives of the players day to day at training grounds and stuff. So that kind of thing interests me a little bit. But yeah, I'm open to lots of things. You know, coaching could be an option as well in the future. But yeah, lots of different ideas going around my head that obviously I'm going to have to give a lot of consideration to in the near future, because like you said, as much as I want my career to go on forever, it's not going to be the case, and I have to start thinking about what's going to come next.
Yeah, no, of course. With that being said, obviously we spoke a lot about the female side of the game. Now with the lads coming up very shortly in the Euros, as a female now, obviously you'll have a good knowledge of international football and what's going on. And what do you think the lads can do in this summer's tournament? Because for me, I'm just kind of happy, as weird as it sounds, just for Wales to be there, given COVID and everything else that's going on. I'm just looking forward to a game of football. But obviously, as somebody that plays, you know, at a good level and scores goals like you do, what are your expectations of those guys? What do you think they should be doing this summer?
You know, I think things have changed a lot in the last year or so for Wales. I think at one point, you looked at the squad and thought it's looking a bit thin. There's not much experience there, but actually, I think the games before Christmas, you know, from sort of September up to Christmas after football resumed again, I've been so impressed with some of the performances that they put in, and some of the younger players have really stepped up to the mark. The likes of Ethan Ampadu, David Brooks when he's fit, they really have the ability to get hold of a game, and to do that at such a young age is no mean feat. You throw into the mix the fact that Gareth Bale seems to be flying again now, and if he's on full form, you know, you could set up shop and be nice and tight. You give the ball to him and he can win a game on his own. He's that good. We haven't seen that for a little while with him. So if he can maintain the run of form that he's on leading into the summer, Aaron Ramsey as well, if he can be fit and firing, Joe Allen will be back, whereas he would have missed last summer's tournament. suddenly things look very, very different to how they did a little while ago. And you think, well, actually, no, we've now got real good depth in the squad. You suddenly got different options and different ways of playing. Kiefer Moore scoring goals for Cardiff. He's a real different option up there. So for me, it's not an easy group to get out of. Of course, it's not. It never is. But I think they can go on and have a very good tournament. Whether it's going to quite live up to the heights of 2016, I don't know, because that was insane, and that was, it was just the most incredible summer. But I certainly think they're going to give it a good go. I think the only other thing that might influence how it goes is how the tournament actually happens. Whether they do maintain this thing of traveling to and from, in this environment, that's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy anyway. It wouldn't have been, an easy feat to travel to and from the likes of Baku, Rome, and back here in the UK. So that's not going to be easy if that travelling still has to happen. But if then it does get put, even if it's into the UK, obviously I think that's going to give them a bit of an advantage. But obviously we wait to see how things go with that. And either way, I do think on the pitch they've got a good chance of certainly getting out of the group and making a dent into the knockout stages.
Yeah, I think with this summer's tournament, I think UEFA have said that they are going to keep things as they are, which I think is frankly ridiculous. I thought it was ridiculous to begin with, to be honest, to have so many host nations. And even when you consider without COVID, I think Spain, all of their group games are home. England, 2 of the 3 are home. I think Scotland have got to play away games, but even as a host country. The whole thing's ridiculous to begin with. But I mean, we'll come back to Gareth Bale in a second. I mean, like you said, he has come into a bit of form now for the first time in a long time. I mean, he hasn't scored at home for Wales since the qualifying campaign for the 2018 World Cup. So having him back fit, would be massive. Is there any young players do you think that we should expect to see break out in the tournament?
I think all the young players that could shine, I think we've already seen glimpses of. There's something about the Welsh shirt that brings out the best in our players, even if they're not having the best time at their clubs. And I think Dan James is a prime example of that. He's had sort of real hot and cold spells at United, but when he turns up and he plays for Wales, you can tell he knows that the team and the manager believe in him. And that brings out like an extra sort of 10% of his performance, and he's fantastic. And I think if again, David Brooks, I mentioned him. If he can get fit, that's the biggest issue with him at the moment. His ankles seem to be made of glass and they're causing him a lot of trouble. But if he can get fit by the summer, then he'll be another player that I'm sure will have a huge influence on the squad. There's a few. Ethan Ampadu, I'm a massive fan of. I think he patrols, whether he's at the back in a 3 or in the midfield as a sort of anchor man. You can see him on the pitch. He's constantly pointing and telling people where to be and where to pass. He's really quite mature beyond his years in terms of his football ability, the reading of the game and that kind of thing. So there's a few that I think stand out. Joe Rodon, again, had a fantastic start to the season with Swansea. Again, not getting so much game time with Spurs, but I still think when he puts that shirt on for Wales, he becomes a new player. Nico Williams. There's too many to, again, we could talk for ages about it, but certainly there's some real players that have got a lot of potential, and if it all comes together, then it could be a really good, interesting watch.
It's exactly like you said. There was a point where it looked like we were really thin on the ground, but it just happened to be the postponement of the Euros has actually just benefited us no end, because there's all these players now coming into a bit of form. Going back to Gareth Bale, the reason I bring up Gareth Bale is I had a question about how the female squad and the male squad mix, if at all. I know that as a records goal scorer, I imagine that you've been to awards ceremonies and things like that, and you crossed paths with them. I didn't know if you'd necessarily, if the female and the male squad had much dealings with each other and how they were treated by each other.
We don't have much to do with each other, to be honest. I think there's been a couple of times where we've been on camp at the same time. In fact, just before the Euros, we were all staying at the Vale of Glamorgan resort. They were doing their sort of pre-tournament prep, and we were there for a couple of games ourselves. So we sort of, you got the odd hello and everything as you cross paths in the corridors. But rather than that, our camps generally aren't aligned, so we don't sort of cross paths very often. As for Gareth, in terms of records, I don't know if he's aware of me or who I am. I've got no idea. He comes across to me as a sort of guy that's not focused on individual accolades anyway, and individual records. I think he seems a very humble guy, and you can see when he plays for Wales, he's so passionate. He loves this, like he's out there playing with his mates, and he's just in a really happy place, and certainly don't get the impression that it's all about him when he's on camp. So I don't know what his thoughts are on the whole goal scorer thing. I've got no idea. Someone would have to ask him that. But yeah, whenever I've had any conversations or dealings with any of the guys, they've been really supportive. They've got a good amount of knowledge about us, which isn't always the case. So yeah, it's nice. I think they support us. Even if not in person, they support us from a distance. And I actually had a chat with Robert Page a couple of months back, because he's obviously an ex-Watford player as well. So we've kind of got that in common, and he knew a lot about us too, which is credit to him. So yeah, I think there's just a mutual respect between the two squads, even if we don't get to see each other very often.
Oh, that's really great to hear. Obviously, we've got so many things we'd love to chat to you about. I mean, we don't want to take up too much of your time, but I think that one of the things that I wanted to pick your brain about, sort of the last thing from me, really, it's a little bit off topic, but I wanted to read you a quote from Megan Rapinoe and just get your thoughts at the end of it. The quote is, "You can't win a championship without gays on your team." And I guess the question for me is, go with me. I guess the question here really is, there's a lot of openly lesbian footballers in the women's game, but there's basically no gay men's footballers. And I want to know, is it easier to be a lesbian in women's football than to be gay in men's football? Or why is it easier for them to come out?
It's a tough question. I think, yes, it is easier. I think it's just generally more accepted. I think because there's always been that stereotype that if you play football, or even if you play sport, a lot of the time, rugby, cricket, hockey, all those sports have got that stereotype of, if you're a girl and you play it, you must be gay. And of course, that's not the case at all. But it almost, I think sport can become a safe place for girls, young girls who are maybe questioning their sexuality, or they're realizing that they are gay. Often they'll find somebody in the same situation, or somebody that's been through the same thing within a sporting environment. And I think just over time, it's just become normal and accepted, and it's not a problem to be that, and girls are able to be themselves much more when they're with their teammates than when they're somewhere else. And I think that's just how it's happened. And obviously it's wonderful that it is like that, because I'm sure you've heard Jess Fishlock's stories of school being a really tough time for her, but she was able to go to football and be herself and not be judged or questioned about it. And I think that's just how football has been, ever since I've been young anyway. And if even when I was younger and I wasn't kind of aware of what being gay was, when I did kind of find out that people were, I was kind of like, okay, cool. Like, there was no problem. It was just there was no big deal around it, and I think that helped. Whereas for men, I think it's always been a bit more stigmatized, especially in football. It's a man's game. It's a man's sport. You have to be big and tough and strong, and there's no way you can be homosexual. That would be the most terrible thing in the world. And I think that's just carried on. And I think what Megan Rapinoe's quote is probably saying is that statistically there will be at least one person who is gay in a championship winning team, which I'm kind of guessing is what her quote means, that statistically someone in a championship team will be gay, whether you know it or not. And she's probably right. But it's just, there's so much pressure on that first person to come out as a current gay footballer. It's going to be a massive moment, but someone's going to have to take a lot on their shoulders when they decide to do that. And at the moment, it's clear that nobody's ready to do that at the minute. Whether they're not ready themselves or the world is not ready to hear it is perhaps a bit of both. I'd love for them to be able to come out and for everything to be great. But as we know, the world is not a nice place at times. So it's going to be a big moment, and hopefully it's not too far away, because that'll be a sign that society's maybe changing and becoming more accepting of people and people being themselves.
Yeah, no, indeed. Yeah, no, that's a terrific way to end it. That's honestly incredible insight, Helen, from yourselves, and we really appreciate it. I know you've got to get off now because you're a busy girl. You've got 1,000,001 things to do, so we won't take up any more of your time. Obviously, add us up on the social media platforms. If you aren't already following Helen, make sure you do. We'll put her Twitter and Instagram sort of handles in the description. Like and subscribe, all that good jazz. We got plenty more content coming. Matt Jarvis, ex-England Wolves. He'll be with us next week, so we'll be speaking to Matt about various other things. But in the meanwhile, people, stay safe, take care. We'll see you next time. Take care. Ciao.